Hi, I'm Carrie Boynton.
And I'm Mike Sibley. We're the leaders of the James Moore manufacturing team. And on this episode of More on Manufacturing, we're joined by guest Heather Parbst with Velocity Advisory Group. She's the Director of Transition Services. And today we're going to be actually talking about transition planning and exit planning, particularly from the business owner's standpoint, and getting some input from Heather, who's not only lives in this arena right now with helping business owners, but also went through a transition herself with selling her own business years ago. So we're going to get some really good input and some insight from Heather on this today, and looking forward to this conversation. So welcome, Heather, and why don't you just start off maybe by telling us what exactly is transition planning? How does it work? Who does it apply to?
Sure, Mike. And thanks, Mike and Carrie, for having me. I'm happy to be here. So transition planning really is looking at, and exit planning together really is looking at three legs of a stool. If you think of it that way, you've got the owner's personal readiness, like how prepared are they to exit and move on to the next thing in their life. You've got the financial piece of that. How prepared are they financially? Are they set up to achieve their financial long-term goals? And then you have the business side of that. Is the business ready for the transition? Is it sustainable post-transition after that that owner exits the organization? Can it continue on and be profitable? And does that value transfer across, through the transition? So that's really what transition planning is about. It's about getting the owner to a place where they have a choice in when and how they exit.
Well, I think that's actually a good point, actually. Could you just hit on that a little bit more? So I think the key thing is you said the owner has a choice, and that's opposed to sometimes where we get into a situation where they've aged, they've gotten to a point where in age they have to, a medical issue. But just, maybe it's worth reiterating that point. The owner has a choice in how this goes.
Yeah, I mean, often you'll get an owner who's just due to lack of preparation or unforeseen circumstances. Maybe it's not even a lack of preparation, but maybe there's been something tragic that's happened in their life, a disability or a divorce or something like that. And because they've been very focused on growing the business, maybe from a purely income perspective, and haven't focused on the value side of the business, they need to make a transition and they're really stuck. They're not able to they might not be able to sell at all, and they have to shut the doors, or they're not able to pull the value out of that organization when they really need it. So yeah, it is about getting them to a point where they have a choice at any stage of the game. I'm ready to exit, or I'm going to continue on, and in both of those scenarios, I'm fine.
So before we dive into what business owners should be doing or looking out for, what common mistakes do you see business owners making, or what should they avoid doing?
Well, I think we alluded to one, which is a lack of runway. A lot of times they just wait till maybe they're burnt out, or they haven't thought about when this is going to happen. So not giving themselves 3 to 5 years to really make this work. That's one of the biggest things that we see. And also just entering in with unrealistic expectations. We have a tendency to see more value in the things that we love, and business owners and businesses are just the same. You think you have more in it than you actually do. So those are two. Not having the right advisors at the table. I've seen several situations where instead of going to experts in the field that can really attest to the value of the organization, say they might go to their personal financial planner who, tries to be very helpful but might give them misleading information. So I would say those are the three big things that I see. There's tons of others, just planning from a reactive space as opposed to being proactive. Not having a plan at all is a big thing. And I'm not talking about just the plan for on the business side. I'm also talking about the personal plan. I think it's like, I want to say 75% of business owners 1 year after they sell their business are unhappy. And that's not necessarily because the deal was bad. That's because their identity was wrapped up in that business, and now that's gone and they haven't thought through what's coming next, right? So to avoid that, really taking the time to plan out what the next phase of your life is going to look like after you go through this transition is really important. So those are some of the biggest things I see.
Well, and as we're talking about this, a couple of things come to mind. First, you mentioned that emotional connection, and of course, that is one of the things that we try to maybe step away from is, okay, let's put the emotions aside and let's look at truly the business itself and how do we work on this? How do we look at this? How do we value this? Because that's going to be different depending on how you're going. But when we're talking about business transition, it's not just selling to a third party. It could be to family. It could be to an internal management group, right? So there's different avenues that this can go down.
Yeah, and to your point, selling to family, that's I think a lot of times owners underestimate what's required in really prepping that successor to be successful in the new role. And they may not necessarily choose that successor with a lot of thought about what the future of the organization needs to be. So they think like, in this moment, I'm the leader, I'm going to find somebody that's just like me. Mm-hmm. And then they don't think about, well, wait, actually the next phase of this organization is going to need something different. So that's something that we see tend to happen. So yeah, a lot of this is around preparing the successor, getting a really good transfer of knowledge from that business owner over to the successor so that they can run, take off running with all of that institutional knowledge in place. That's huge too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And of course, I alluded to this at the beginning, but you sold a business. You've gone through this process. So I'm sure you've learned a ton. Now, I know you work with a number of clients going through this, so you've learned a lot that way too. But yeah. I mean, just from your own practical experience being on the inside and going through this, maybe talk to our business owners out there about some of the things you experienced and things you might do a little differently or things that worked really well for you. I think that kind of message is really the story. It can be really valuable to our listeners out there.
Yeah, it was quite an experience. I had no idea what I was doing. I had spent the last several years really learning how to grow the business, how to manage the people, how to build the team, all of these sorts of things. But I had no idea what was involved in actually determining the value of a company, what the sale process was like. So it was quite overwhelming, and there was this pressure to keep it somewhat secretive because you didn't want to want it to get out prematurely and have competitors know, that sort of thing. So it was very confusing and a little bit scary initially. Mm-hmm. I was lucky enough to be able to pull in some really great advisors. Specifically for me, I was able to find somebody that was focused on my market or my type of business. So they knew my business model, and that was really helpful. So a couple of things that I learned right away was that I didn't know what I didn't know. There was just a ton out there. It was a complicated process, and I needed more information, and I needed some hand-holding. I was somewhat surprised at the level of emotions that it stirs up. Especially for me, I had a business partnership, and so we were navigating all of that as well. So it was really an emotional experience for me. And having people on my team, on my advisory team that I trusted to air my dirty laundry was important, right? Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I think that a lot of people don't realize is, if you think about the fact that, business owners tend to have like 80% of their personal wealth tied up in their business. Mm-hmm. So when you're going through a business sale, it's not just about the business. You've got to dig up your personal finances, and you've got to have people that you feel comfortable letting in to see all of that and sharing all of that with. So that was really eye-opening for me. And then just realizing that it was kind of neat because the advisor I was working with, we worked a plan to increase the value over a period of time. And it was just neat to see that some of the things that he was telling me, hey, you need to do this, you need to implement this to increase the value. Well, it also increased just the efficiency of the operation. It made my job so much easier over time. Mm-hmm. So it was cool to see that business readiness and exit planning are really just good business strategy.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. And I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but the things that can drive value in your business are also the things that can make you more profitable, more efficient, better employees, more engaged employees. I guess is that a good way to kind of look at that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's, you gain so much if you start earlier in the process because you're building a strong foundation and framework by focusing on those areas that just make it so much easier to scale and grow and then to pull that value out when you want.
So, are there any value drivers that you think business owners should focus on first or prioritize?
I think that depends on the situation. We definitely feel, so there's we look at 7 different value drivers and we put ownership, independence at the center. So if I was to say that there would be one most important, it's a stretch to say it would be definitely that one, but that's really the most critical because you can have all of the other drivers running very well. You can have great financial health, you can have a great strategic growth plan, you can have the right wonderful leadership team in place, but if they're all dependent on that owner to really be driving the organization, when that owner steps out, whether that's for a sale or for some unforeseen circumstance, like I said before, a death or a disability or something like that, the organization's not going to be as sustainable as it could be. It could even fail. So I would say if I had to pick, if you forced my hand to pick one that's most important, I would say it's independence from the owner.
Well, and Heather, let's drill in on that because I know that's, I'm sure you must see this all the time. I know in our business we see where business owners have a hard time, forget about preparing for a sale or preparing for transition. They can't leave the business to even go on vacation in a normal year without having to stay completely plugged in. Oftentimes that's because maybe the management team's not really at that level where they need to be or so on. But maybe talk a little bit more about owner independence beyond just transit, but just in the general day-to-day business for that owner.
It can be a huge stumbling block and a huge bottleneck for the organization. And I think a lot of times people don't understand how they can be negatively impacting the organization in that way. I certainly was one of them. I would, I needed to get better at delegating, and that was one thing that I learned through that process as well. So it's just critical, and it's a shame because there's so much, like, you leave so much money on the table, not just at the time of transition, but just in general, for the health of the organization, and it's stressful to the business owner. So there's so many advantages across the board for really creating teams that can be autonomous and have the ability to make decisions that are filtered through the lens of the organization vision, mission, and values, right? So teaching them how to use that model to make the decisions within the organization just frees the owner up to really focus on where their highest and best use is, to make critical business decisions. It's just better across the board.
What are some, you mentioned that one, so are there 1 or 2 other value drivers you think are pretty critical in this, or more, or maybe they all equally the same? I know you might put that one right at the top, but do you think there's a couple others that you would highlight as really important?
Yeah, we look at 7 total. We look at financial health, which you could probably speak to that better than I can, but having good cash flow, great accounts payable and receivable processes, having the business owner actually be able to understand their financial statements and make healthy business decisions from that. So that's big. We look at strategic growth. Does the organization have an understanding of what the market is asking for? Do their products and services fit that market? Do they have a plan for capturing market share that is effective and working? How is their marketing? That sort of thing. We look at infrastructure, and infrastructure is, yes, it includes the equipment of the organization. How is that? Is it falling apart and out of date? Do you need to upgrade it? But also it's the IT infrastructure and the platforms that the organization is using. Are those up to date and effective and efficient? And then the processes and policies that the organization runs on. So it's a lot of the operational piece. So we look at the infrastructure. We also look at leadership and people. And that's this one, if I had to pick a second most important, this one would probably be it, because if you've got great leadership and you've got great people on your team, then they can be driving growth in all of these other areas, right? So they can be focused on how can we improve the infrastructure? How can we get better at our strategic growth plan? So making sure you got the right people on the bus. And this is all about not just acquisition, but managing and training those people. Like, do you have systems in place to make sure that they are getting the knowledge and tools that they need to continue to be moving the organization ahead? Customer capital is a big one. And that's not just, so when I talk about customer capital, I'm really talking about the relationship that your clients have with you as an organization. Do they come back? Do you have them on any kind of recurring, if possible, do you have them on some kind of recurring revenue plan where they're kind of locked in with you and enmeshed with you? Are they loyal? Do you have any client evangelists that will speak to your quality of service? But then also client concentration. A lot of times we get the worst is when you have an overdependent owner who has 80% of their revenue coming from, the top few clients, and it's just so hard. So making sure that you have diversity in your client concentration, and that if you lose one or two clients, or if one specific area of your business is, let's say, think about the pandemic, like if one specific area was really hit hard by, COVID, are there other areas that you can be leveraging in your client base? So customer capital. What am I missing? Intentional culture. And this is a soft one, so people a lot of times kind of brush it off as not important, but there's plenty of research, and I'm happy to email anyone that inquires. There's plenty of research out there that will point to a strong, healthy culture directly impacting ROI. So are your employees engaged? Do they want to be there? Is there a good level of accountability on your team? Can people communicate openly and effectively? I remember reading employers lose something like 2 hours of productivity per day with employees that are caught up in just emotional drama and inefficiencies and things like that. Wow. So that's a lot, Yeah. And a lot of those things can be addressed through creating just a healthy culture. So I think I gave you all 7, but those are the areas that we want.
Yeah, and those make a lot of sense, and I think that's why getting somebody to talk to and go through this stuff is so important, because it's easy to overlook some of this. And I guess out of all of those, you can kind of tell some are obvious, some are not so obvious, and I think I know where you're going to go with this, but which one is the one that businesses overlook the most? I think we kind of went there, but we'll let you just to reiterate the point, because I do think it's important.
Well, I think they often overlook culture. But I would also position leadership and people in there. Just in general, the people side, I think, can be overlooked because we're so focused on, delivering the product or, building the product or whatever, and we miss the people side of it. And that's really where you have the most potential to maximize value, because again, you can create an army of people that are out there all with the same mission, all aligned. Imagine how effective an organization can be when everybody's aligned for the same goal. And at the same time, if you have a disengaged team that's, sucking up resources and not contributing in a way that they could be, you're just dragging the value of that organization down. So I would say culture and leadership and people would be the 2 that receive the least amount of focus and could generate the most significant gains.
Sure. So as we kind of wind down here in our conversation, I really appreciate it. Is there any last piece of advice, or just as a summary for everything we've just kind of gone through? Is there one last thing you would just suggest to our business owners out there that are even maybe haven't started thinking about this, or just on the edge of starting thinking about this? What would be the one thing that you might tell them or give them a piece of advice as we kind of move towards the end here?
I think strong business readiness and exit planning is good business strategy. So start as early as possible. Start focusing on those areas within the organization as early as possible. Again, you need at least a 3 to 5 year runway to really get the value out of an organization that you want. But implementing those changes now is just going to increase the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the value across the board. So starting early and building a strong team of qualified quality advisors that you trust as soon as possible.
Well, great. Well, Heather, thank you so much today. And for Heather and Velocity, they do a great job working with management and intentional culture and all the things that Heather was talking about in terms of these internal management teams. Their group does a tremendous job with that. So your insight was really phenomenal today. I think that gives our listeners a lot to think about. So I appreciate you being here, and I hope everyone out there has a great rest of your day.
To learn more about James Moore and Company's manufacturing services, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our More on Manufacturing series to receive updates when new videos and podcasts are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us on our website. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape on manufacturing continues to rapidly evolve.